You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and now I have an update to a case that has always bothered me. I've given some brief updates to this case throughout the last year and a half, but now the update I bring you today could be the final blow to the family of Elllen Greenberg and their fight in the criminal courts. All right, here's the backstory. At age 27, Elllen Greenberg was living with her fiancé, Samuel Goldberg, in Philadelphia. She was working as a first grade teacher, and on the afternoon of January 26th of 2011, a blizzard hit the Philadelphia area. As the snow accumulated, Elllen decided she just needed to leave work early and return to her apartment. She kind of had this fear the snow was getting too dangerous and messy. As Elllen busied herself chopping up some fruit, her fiancé Samuel left for the gym. Samuel said he returned from the gym to find the door to the apartment locked, and he couldn't get Elllen to answer the door. He tried to reach her on her cell, but that didn't work either. He then left to go get the apartment security and asked them to open the door. He was told that was against building policy. Samuel then took matters into his own hands, and he forced the door to the apartment opened. He said he found Elllen slumped in the corner of the kitchen cabinets. He called 911 and was told by the dispatcher to start CPR. But that's when he noticed a knife in her chest, and the dispatcher said to not continue. When investigators arrived, they found a deceased Elllen with 20 stab wounds. 20. 10 on her neck and head, and 2 of which had penetrated deep into her brain. There was no suicide note. In fact, a half-made bowl of fruit salad was on the counter, almost as if Elllen had been interrupted while making that salad. The assistant medical examiner could see some other injuries besides the obvious neck and head stabbings. Elllen had bruises on the right side of her body in just some various stages of healing, so they all didn't occur that day, but they were all on the right side of her body. That assistant medical examiner ruled Ellen's death a homicide less than 24 hours after she had been found by Samuel. But investigators were telling the media something different. The Philadelphia Inquirer was reporting that investigators were saying Elllen killed herself. Now, their main reasons? The door was locked from the inside, and Elllen was on anti-anxiety medication. Okay, I'm rolling my eyes, but let's keep going. Now, both those facts are true. Elllen was taking Klonopin and Ambien, and the door was locked. But how does a person inflict that many stab wounds with 2 of the stab wounds going deep into her brain? Well, months after the ME's initial ruling of homicide, the family was informed the cause of death had been changed to suicide. And since that day, Ellen's parents, Josh and Sandra Greenberg, have been on a mission to prove how their daughter died. So what facts do we know are true? Well, there seemed to be no other disturbance in the apartment besides that kind of small area in the kitchen where Elllen was slumped on the floor. And then also there was the broken door that had occurred when Samuel knocked it down. Samuel had told the police the swing bar lock was engaged when he knocked down that door. You know, kind of like the kind that are in a hotel room. It's a swing bar that comes over across the edge of the door. Okay, also, there's no other DNA evidence that was found on the knife. The only person who appeared to have touched that knife or left DNA on it was Elllen. So we have those facts. We also know an independent review has been done by the Pennsylvania AG's office, and they concluded that the evidence supports suicide as a manner of death. Now, the Greenbergs wanted their own investigation, and so they went ahead and used a different forensic pathologist who concluded that Ellen's death was strongly suspicious of homicide. Now, that expert's biggest concern was that the knife wounds at the back of Ellen's head, well, how can a woman inflict those wounds on herself? And then another expert reviewed the case a few years later, and that expert stated that the 2 deep wounds to the brain would have left Elllen unable to plunge the knife into her chest. But during the autopsy, a different expert was consulted, and I'm going to do air quotes here, allegedly, she said that Elllen could have continued to stab herself because the spinal cord had not been damaged by the 2 deep wounds in the back of her head. Okay, Lots of things stink about this case. One of the things, that expert who stated that there was no damage to the spinal cord, well, she was never billed or invoiced for her work. So was she actually there? And if so, why is there no monetary trail? She has also since admitted that she has no particular memory of that case. And other investigators also have problems with the blood stains, saying the way the blood trailed from the body led them to believe she was moved after her death. And if it's a suicide, how did that happen? Now, more issues from what I think we can call was a botched investigation is that the knife found in Ellen's chest was never fingerprinted. It was just swabbed for DNA. And another thing, only one knife was found, which means that was the knife that caused the 20 wounds, one single knife. And so Ellen would have had to have done all 20 wounds on herself, even though some of the wounds went into her brain before she stabbed her chest. Now, do you know anyone who stops making fruit salad and then just goes, I think I'll stab myself 20 times? Well, back in 2019, Ellen's parents filed a civil suit against the Philadelphia's Medical Examiner's Office and also that assistant ME, Marlon Osborne. Now that suit, well, it simply wanted the cause of death to be changed due to the new reports and examinations. They're not asking for any money. They just want her autopsy report to read something different. Well, this led the county district attorney's office to reopen the investigation. And then we got to take into account the social aspect of this case. And you're probably like, what? Why does the social aspect matter? Well, in this case, it does. Samuel's family is prominent in Philadelphia. And Samuel also has an uncle who is a judge. Ellen's parents claim that judge took items from the scene before the investigation was complete. So my question is, why was he even at the scene? Ellen's father, Josh, said that the judge took computers, electronics, and even Ellen's purse. The judge said he was given permission by the police to take those items. And he said the reason he did was because he was worried that those items would be stolen from the apartment due to the damaged door. Okay, there's more. That judge called the apartment manager, and according to Fox News, he told the manager the scene was no longer a crime scene, so the family was going to come get some things. Well, that apartment manager, she asked if she could get the apartment cleaned then. I mean, she's just sitting there going, oh, it's not a crime scene, so can I get it cleaned? And I guess the authorities told her to go ahead and do that. This was just one day after the murder. So she got on it, and a company came and cleaned the scene. And then detectives showed up with a warrant, but everything had been cleaned. Okay, there's more on the social aspect too. Remember how I told you that an independent investigation had been conducted by the Pennsylvania AG's office? Well, back then, that office was directed by Attorney General Josh Shapiro. Josh Shapiro is now the governor of Pennsylvania. Well, Shapiro and Samuel Greenberg's family have connections. At least that's what several media outlets and also the Greenbergs claim. Back then, the AG's office said they saw no conflict, but due to the heightened coverage and perception, the AG chose to remove himself from the case. Now, when all of that happened, the case was moved to the Chester County District Attorney's Office. And if you remember, I referenced earlier, they have the case and they have had it for 2 years. And they now have made a ruling. So the update to this case is, on Friday, the office announced that based on current state of evidence, they cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime was committed in the death of Elllen Greenberg. They have now placed the investigation into a, quote, inactive status. Now, they chose that designation because there's really no statute of limitations on murder in Pennsylvania, so the case can be reopened if additional evidence is discovered or provided. Now, the Greenbergs were disheartened by the news, but they were not dissuaded from carrying on with their fight. They said through their attorney that they feel core issues were not investigated in the 2 years that Chester County had the case. But they also said that they did appreciate the county's efforts. Now, that civil suit about changing the cause of death from suicide to homicide, it's currently being reviewed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they are awaiting a ruling there. The Greenbergs have also filed another civil suit, this one seeking monetary damages from the city of Philadelphia and several people who conducted the investigation into Ellen's death. The Greenberg's attorney said they are looking forward to an upcoming civil trial where a full and forthright examination of the core issues surrounding Ellen's murder may be publicly conducted before an independent judge and a jury. I'll make sure I keep watching those two civil suits because this one, man, it's just one of those that gnaws at you. Well, it was just 2 episodes ago that I brought you an update to the Micah Miller case. Now, I started that episode saying we knew there would be more chapters to this story. Who thought just 1 week later we would be provided another chapter? All right, for anyone who still needs reminding, 30-year-old Micah Miller died from an investigated and then determined self-inflicted gunshot wound in April of this year. Now, I know there are plenty of listeners who think it might be foul play. I totally get that, but as of now, law enforcement is saying her death was by her own making. She was found in Lumber River State Park in North Carolina. However, Micah was married to Pastor John Paul Miller, and their church and congregation is in South Carolina. At the time of her death, police believe John Paul, or JP, was with another woman at a heavily attended event nowhere near Lumber River State Park. At the time of her death, also, Micah and JP were in the midst of a divorce. Micah had claimed through her journal entries that JP was abusing her with coercive behavior. Micah's sister had even told the public that Micah had warned her family that if she ended up with a bullet in her head, that it was not by her own doing, that it would be by JP. And it's only fair to say JP's behavior is at best odd. He is much older than Micah, and he began being her spiritual leader when she was just 10 years old. And the way he chose to announce her death during his Sunday sermon left so many people with lingering questions about this, supposed man of God. Well, following an extensive investigation, the authorities determined that Micah had chosen to end her life and that JP was in the clear. Micah's family and JP fought for several months over the settling of Micah's estate, but finally the two parties agreed to terms, and it seems to have moved on. Both of them have just moved on with their lives. So that brings us to the update that I brought you last week. That includes the fact that the FBI had raided JP's South Carolina home. About 25 agents used evidence bags to gather items from the home, all of this while JP was not there. An FBI spokesperson said the search was court-ordered, which basically told the public nothing, except they weren't breaking the law. Well, last week's update also referenced JP filing papers to start a new church. Okay, what's going on now? Well, authorities were back at JP's Myrtle Beach home, except this time they arrested him on charges of assault. Now, the details are a little murky, but an affidavit that was released said JP got into a row with a protester out front of his church. The affidavit doesn't identify what was being protested outside the church, but several times over the last months, people have gathered demanding justice for Micah. So it might be the safest bet that the protesters were there about the death of Micah. Now, the person accusing JP of abuse, apparently that person approached JP and taunted him by saying, "Here, kitty, kitty." Now, JP's lawyers told People magazine that she in fact said, "Pussycat, pussycat, run, run." Whatever. Either way, she's referencing JP as, shall we say, a coward? Now, in the affidavit, police say JP turned on the victim, getting up into her face, and that he started recording her with his phone as they exchanged words. He then allegedly tapped her hat and walked away. Well, police have video of the event in their possession. And JP's lawyer says he has a video that shows the woman being the aggressor. He said when JP turned on her, she screamed, "Don't effing touch me." And JP's lawyer said JP held his camera up and then turned and left, all of which he says is perfectly legal. Now, a witness at the event told law enforcement that JP struck the woman twice before leaving the scene. Okay, so following his visit to the county jail, JP was released on $776 bond. And JP's lawyer said the following in a statement to People magazine. "Enough's enough. The city of Myrtle Beach has failed this guy and his churchgoers. They've allowed these people to kill his church, and they're allowing these people to stalk and harass John Paul Miller. And arresting him just gives them more bait, right? It gives them more purpose. They're not going to stop. And like I said, when I started last week's episode about Micah Miller, and when I start this episode about Micah Miller, I'm telling you, this is not the last chapter. I'll keep watching what's going on. Now, I recorded this podcast late Saturday, and I sent it to production. And so as you listen on Monday, the Delphi Murder Trial jury will have completed their third day of deliberations, at least that many. And to be honest, we could have a verdict when you're listening to this. But I didn't want to squander this opportunity. I wanted to give you a few of the key takeaways from the trial so that no matter what stage this podcast finds us in, we can know how the trial played out. Okay, on February 13th of 2017, 14-year-old Libby German and 13-year-old Abby Williams were murdered in the woods near a trail the two had been walking on. Now, their bodies were found the very next day. The case gained national attention when police released an image of a man and kind of a clipped recording of that man saying the words, "down the hill." Libby had recorded the video on her phone. Well, Richard Allen was arrested years later. He was charged with murder, and this following a heavily scrutinized investigation. So what have we learned as the trial has moved forward with Richard Allen up for murder for killing Libby and Abby? Well, first, we now have clarification on how the two young teens died on that afternoon in 2017. Authorities had told the public that they had linked Richard to the scene through an unspent bullet, but there was never an indication that the two girls died from a gunshot wound. In his opening statement at the beginning of the trial, prosecutor Nick McLeland told the courtroom that both the girls had their throats slit. He stated that Libby had several incision wounds on the right side of her neck, with one of them being 3.5 inches long. The pathologist in the case has wavered on what kind of knife was used to make those cuts, but he has finally settled on a box cutter as the tool that was used to harm the girls. Prosecutors also revealed that Libby's body was found completely naked. However, rape kits concluded that there was no DNA evidence showing either girl was sexually assaulted. Now, during the trial, two teen girls who were also on the bridge that day, well, they testified and shared in their testimonies about seeing the, quote, bridge guy, which was the name given to the man seen on Libby's phone video. One girl said the man she saw had on too many clothes for how warm the day was, and that he had on dark clothes and was wearing a hat. When this witness was shown a picture of bridge guy, she told the jury that was the man she had seen. The second teen girl testified she also saw a man who was overdressed for the weather. She claimed she said hello to that guy, but that he didn't respond to her as they crossed paths. She said the man had a, quote, weird vibe. Prosecutors also laid out their version of the timeline of the killings. Libby's phone showed the girls were dropped off at the trail for the Monhigh Bridge at about 2:05 p.m. 9 minutes later, Libby recorded the infamous video of the bridge guy. Phone records show that Libby's phone then changed longitude, altitude, and elevation over the next few minutes, and finally stopped changing at 2:31 p.m., so about 15 minutes after Libby took the video recording. During that time, Libby's phone was moving off the bridge and presumably down into the gully or the empty riverbed. By 2:32, Libby's phone never moved again. So just 27 minutes after the girls were dropped off. Libby's phone eventually lost all power at 10:32 that night. Her phone, however, was alerted with 15 to 20 texts at 4:33 a.m. Kind of weird, right? Now, most of those texts had been sent hours earlier, but were now just reaching her phone. Detectives could not explain to the jury why the phone died, yet all of a sudden reignited at that early morning hour. Also, the detectives testified that 23 devices were seized from Richard Allen's home, yet none of them connected Richard to the crime scene. Now, the trial also revealed to us and also the jury the erratic behavior exhibited by Richard while he has been incarcerated awaiting trial. Okay, here's how that all played out. He was arrested in the fall of 2022. And initially, his behavior was, I guess, what you could call normal. But then in the spring of 2023, Richard began hitting his head against his cell wall. He would use his toilet water to wash his face. He stopped eating food, but began eating paper that had been provided to him. And he smeared his feces on the walls of his cell and even rubbed his feces on his own face. When this erratic behavior began, so did his confessions. Investigators testified that Richard had confessed multiple times to his wife and to the psychologist and also to some of the corrections officers. Psychologist Monica Walla said that Richard Elllen confessed to her that he ordered the girls down the hill and that he intended to rape them, but he was interrupted by either a person or a van, and so he got scared and instead he slit their throats. Now, once he had killed them, she said he told her that he had covered them up with branches. Now, in his confessions to his wife, via jail phone calls, Richard told her the following: "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." And during those calls, Kathy, that's Richard's wife, well, she would respond with phrases like, "No, you didn't. Why would you say that?" She also told him that something was wrong with him, I believe referencing that he was dramatically different than he had been when he was arrested. Now, a neuropsychologist who testified for the defense said that the 13 months that Richard had spent in solitary confinement could actually have altered Richard's brain chemistry. That neuropsychologist said Richard had experienced hallucinations, suicidal ideation, and also psychosis. 2 specific corrections officers testified that Richard repeatedly admitted to killing the 2 girls. Well, Dr. John Martin, who treats inmates, he was called as a state rebuttal witness. Dr. Martin said he met Richard in November of 2022. This was shortly after he was arrested. Martin said Richard arrived at the jail with a Prozac prescription because of a history of depression, but Martin said he considered him stable at that time. It wasn't until April of 2023 when Richard Elllen started showing signs of psychosis, at least according to this doctor. On the stand, Dr. Martin said he got a call on April 13th to come visit Richard. That doctor said he found Richard naked on a mattress, covered in feces, and he was told he had been eating that feces. Dr. Martin then went on to say, after experimenting with a couple of drugs, they were able to get Richard's psychosis under control. So we need to keep in mind here, the way the jury's looking at this is they're taking all of this evidence in and deciding, did those so-called admittance to killing the girls, did that comply or land in the same time frame as his so-called psychosis? A lot of different expert testimonies that they're factoring in here. Okay. We also need to remember that gun, that one that I talked about earlier. Well, that really is the key piece of evidence that the prosecution has that links Richard to the scene of the killings. Prosecution says Richard owned a Sig Sauer Model P226, and that the unspent .40 caliber bullet that was discovered near the girls' bodies, well, they say that was ejected from Richard's gun. But a defense witness says that's not all the way accurate. Okay, see, one side is saying the bullet, whether it's ejected or fired, shows signs of matching that gun. But the defense says you can't compare the two, that the markings are different, and it's basically like comparing apples to oranges. Okay, and this seems to be something the jury is hung up on. They have submitted 15 questions about the testing method that occurred with the gun and the fired bullets. Now, during the closing arguments, Richard's defense attorney said if his client had killed 2 girls, wouldn't he have just gotten out of the area? And wouldn't he have also destroyed the gun that he ejected the bullet from? He had 5 years to leave. He had 5 years to get rid of that gun. He told jurors that his client had admitted to being near the bridge on that day in a 2017 interview with investigators. Yet, those tapes from that 2017 interview, well, they're now just gone. They're nowhere to be found. They're just lost in that evidence Bermuda Triangle. The defense also pointed the finger at a potential suspect for the murders, saying the Indiana State Police didn't look into him enough. Okay, well, what's the prosecution saying? Well, in their closing arguments, they said they have proven that Richard Elllen is definitely the bridge guy. They also doubled down on the bullet being one ejected from Richard's gun. They highlighted the confessions and they talked about Richard being scared by a van, and that's when he killed the girls instead of raping them. Well, guess what? That potential other suspect, the one the defense brought up, he owned a van, and the prosecution thinks that Richard knew that, and that's why he included saying, hey, I was scared by that van, and that guy actually was only driving past and he wasn't there. Now, I felt it necessary to recap this trial, just in case a verdict is reached while this podcast is in production. And I wanted you to know a couple of things in case it comes back with a verdict. First off, why was it taking the jury longer than maybe some expected to find a conclusion? Well, I think you can see that the potential psychosis might explain away some of the confessions. They're probably wrestling with that. And also, the jury is clearly concerned about the bullet evidence, so they're probably wrestling with that. Remember, this jury was seated from a neighboring county, and they have been sequestered. So they've been completely isolated, and they're probably ready to go home to their families. Yet they're taking several days to go through the evidence. This is exactly how we want this process to work. Watch my social media for updates to this case. And now quickly to close out the episode, a case I'm following that I thought I would give you just some small tidbits of information about. Here's how it goes. The wife of an Illinois judge has been charged with murder in the shooting death of her husband. 44-year-old Megan Valentine allegedly shot and killed her husband, 41-year-old Judge Michael Valentine. This all happened 6 days ago. Midday on Tuesday, the Edwards County Sheriff's Office was dispatched to Judge Valentine's home in Albion, simply for a welfare check. Okay, piecing everything together, I'm guessing no one had heard from Michael and he was supposed to be at the office on Monday. When the authorities arrived, they found Michael dead outside of his home, and Megan was immediately taken into custody. Now, like I said, not much has been shared, but Megan's attorney did not fight for her to get out on bail. And if you're following this case, you're getting lots of reasons why this could potentially be. Maybe her felony is just too intense and she doesn't deserve bail, but you see lots of other people in Illinois being sprung. So I'm not sure why he didn't fight for more for her. Maybe it's just a time frame issue. Maybe she's safer in jail than she is out on bail. Now, we know this for sure. She will remain jailed until her next hearing, and that's set for tomorrow. Judge Valentine has a son and a daughter, and in my social media digging, it appears he was very highly respected. I read one post where a lawyer said she argued one of her first cases before Judge Valentine, and that she had made many, many mistakes in that case. And despite her inexperience in the courtroom, she said Judge Valentine was gracious and instructive and that he never lost his patience with her. So, you guys, I'm sure there's going to be so much more coming out on this case, including where do you hold a fair trial if we get to that stage? I mean, he's a judge in this county and well respected. It's going to have some serious complications to it. I can also understand why everything is so hush-hush. This is one of their own, and I'm sure they are being ultra aware of the high-profile approach to this case. I will keep you updated. All right, I thought I'd take a couple of moments to update you on some comments on the cases that I covered in the last two episodes. First off, let's go to this YouTube comment by Mrs. Hughes 22. She says, YTF? Didn't the parents report the sexual abuse of their daughter? Ridiculous. Thanks for all that you do, Mama Jules. Okay, she's referencing that case where the 4 elders from the church, the Gateway Church, were basically relieved of their duties from a case that had happened years and years ago. In that case, the father went straight to the abuser or the alleged abuser and said, knock it off now or I'm going to report you. And then that's all he did. Now, I get it. I totally get her sentiments here. It was a different time. I believe in today's world, he would have responded differently, or at least I hope so. I think he would have done things different in today's world. That's one of the great things. There's been some negatives about the Me Too movement. It's one of the great things about the Me Too movement that people are not as hesitant to report their sexual abuse crimes. And I also believe the Me Too movement helped police and investigators be a little more kind and open to the reports of abuse. I think we just have done a better job of treating the victims or the potential victims in a more warm and loving environment. All right, you guys, please keep commenting on the episodes. I'll share comments as they come forward. And you can also send me a direct message. I have done so many cases based off of direct messages from the listeners, especially ones that are a little more local and not getting as much national attention. Those are my favorite because I'll tell you, I believe the local reporters do the best job of covering those crimes. Sometimes the national outlets just don't dig like the local crime reporters do. So I love those case suggestions as well. And you guys, thanks for joining me here for this Monday episode. I love my listeners, and you have been very receptive of this podcast. I've been doing it a little bit over a year and a half now, and I have loved it. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Please leave a 5-star review and a positive comment if you're so inclined. And go ahead and like us on our social media accounts and on YouTube. And do all of the Oh No Media podcasts. We have Into the Dark, hosted by Peyton Moreland. We have Rise in Crime, hosted by me. And then we also have Murder with My Husband, hosted by Peyton Moreland and Garrett Moreland. You can join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.